Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
I'm Egbert, the owner of this station. Check out my website at egbert.com. That's E-G-G-B-U-R-T, egbert.com. Now it's back to Brad and John. Check out their website at bjshow.co. The BJ Show? Come on, guys. Anyway, here's B and J.
You know, I love it to have a boss that's so supportive of us. No matter what he says, it's always...
You know what? All you can ask sometimes is that a boss just stays out of your way and lets you do your thing. Now,
Right.
if you're Brad and you're the HMIC, so to
Yes.
speak, you don't have to worry about that, except for Egbert, and except, Egbert lets you do your thing, Brad. I never hear from him.
For the most part, yeah, you don't get the calls I do. Okay. Okay, John in the news. There's a story that John had, because I do read johncombest.com. There's a story about, which paper was this in Columbia, which alleged that one of the...
Oh, the Columbia Missourian, yeah.
Which is the University of Missouri
student-run
paper.
publication,
The student-run
correct.
publication.
Yep.
And the story was about one of the congressional dudes, right?
It was about two, yeah, and to be fair, it was a column, so it wasn't a news story, but it was a column.
And it alluded to the fact that these people represented Columbia, but they don't ever go to Columbia. Wasn't that the gist of the story?
Yeah, the line was that, and I can give a little bit more background if you want, but in general, the line was that Congressman Mark Alford and Congressman Blaine Luetkemeyer hadn't visited, it suggested that they hadn't visited Columbia in the last year.
Which was not true, correct?
Which was not true, yeah. Both congressmen had been in Columbia several times. That's correct.
And not only that, one of them or both of them actually was at the Eagle, the radio station that Stephanie Bell's on, and she interviewed them in the studio, and the studios are right there on,
right, and Steph posted the video to that. That's correct.
Right there on Highway 63. You can't get any more in Columbia than 63. What is that? I think I can't remember. They're not at Broadway. They're further south than that. Anyway, or Stadium, whatever it's called. She had him in the studio. Now, who was it wrote the article about that?
Yeah, so a little bit of background. So there's a gentleman named David Weber. So David Weber is a longtime professor of political science at Mizzou. He's retired now. And I'll tell you in a minute, my extreme bias about the story. But David Weber is a well-respected gentleman who taught at Mizzou for decades, and he has written columns for the Columbia Missourian since 1994. So for 30 years, he's written columns here. He does, as I understand it, he doesn't teach anymore at Mizzou. Here's my extreme bias. When I started johncombest.com in 2001, the first professor to add my website to his syllabus was David Weber.
Really?
Yeah. And because of that, I feel a sense of loyalty to David Weber. I link to his stuff even when it only tangentially mentions Missouri or Missouri's elected officials. So I have a lot of respect for David Weber, and I think most folks throughout the state of Missouri do as well. And I have an extreme bias toward people, Brad, who were good to me when they didn't have to be good to me.
You mean an extreme positive biase? Bias almost sounds negative.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But it's an extreme positive bias and there are a number of folks throughout my life who before anybody was really going to my website or relying on it were kind to me when they didn't have to be. And I would put David Weber in that category. This weekend, on the 19th, I think it was posted to the Missourian website. And, it was David had included a sentence toward the end of his story about how Columbia, his broader point was that Columbia, because Columbia was split into two congressional districts, it really watered down. His argument is that it watered down Columbia's influence among the federal delegation. Now, you could argue contrary to that having the region represented by two congressmen would actually bolster its voice in Congress. But we're not here to quibble about that. The point is, at the end of one of David's paragraphs, he included a sentence where he said that he hadn't seen or heard, and I'll bring the quote up here in a moment. He said that, and I included a screenshot of this on Twitter, that neither Blaine Luetkemeyer or Mark Alford had been in Columbia. Here's the line that he said. He said, I have not seen or heard that either was in Columbia this past year because, well, our city has been, quote, fringed out, referring to the congressional lines.
And
now David is unfortunately not on Twitter. Maybe fortunately for him, he's not on Twitter. Or I certainly would have flagged this for him personally, which I do when folks make a mistake and I have a relationship with them, I flag it for them instead of calling it out. But I called it out to the Missourian. I highlighted it in a tweet. And actually, before I highlighted it to the Missourian, I included Mark Alford on the tweet. And Alford went on a multi-tweet conversation, we'll say. He didn't include the Columbia Missourian on it. So if I was on Mark Alford's staff, I'd probably have a conversation with Mark about how to make sure that the target of your tweets is actually included on there so they see it. But Congressman Alford responded, pointed out the times that he had been in Columbia. He pointed out a number of times where he invited Columbia Missourian reporters and the newsroom to his events, but the Missourian chose to not report on it. Now, the reason why this is a feel-good story, Brad, is because the executive editor, who's a woman named Elizabeth Stevens, she's the executive editor of the Missourian, she responded right away. And to our previous conversation, Brad, it was a Sunday. So she was working, or at least monitoring social media on a Sunday. And she said that she removed the piece of David Weber's column that was inaccurate, and she vowed that she would send a reporter to Alford's event. He's having an event in Columbia this week, and she's essentially going to make right and send a reporter to his event this week.
Now, see, this is what bothers me when you have trusted sources of journalism. And once again, this paper is essentially like a quasi university paper, but it's also supposed, and tell me if I'm wrong or not, it's supposed to mimic like a regular newspaper, correct?
Correct. Yeah. The idea is to give journalism students a real life opportunity producing a print publication. And then, they've also had a very strong broadcast journalism effort there at KOMU.
Right, that was the thing I was going to mention, is the interesting thing about University of Missouri Columbia is, and I can tell you this from the radio business, if you work at like a NPR affiliate or a non-commercial or a Christian radio station that doesn't do any commercials, and you try to get a job in commercial radio, you are looked down upon because guess what? You don't get what keeps the transmitter on the air, which is
the
sales,
profiting.
right? Sales and marketing and how you deal with clients and yada, 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 yada. But KOMU, which is Channel 8, is an NBC affiliate that's owned by the University of Missouri, University of Missouri system, and they have students working there. And the interesting thing about it is, if you graduate with a journalism degree from, and heaven help you if you do, but if you graduate with a journalism degree from Mizzou and you've worked at KOMU, you can leave that college with a degree and commercial television experience.
Absolutely.
Which is,
and a number of folks have. I worked with a wonderful woman named Tyne Morgan, who went on to host Ag Day TV, which is huge in the agriculture world. She now hosts U.S. Farm Report, which is syndicated to hundreds of channels throughout the country. But they get an incredible amount of real world. And Brad, you've told the story before of how folks at KOMU, they show up to an event and they're a one-man band. They set up the tripod themselves. They do everything themselves. They produce the digital story themselves. Really great experience.
Right. And more importantly, they're working at a commercial TV station. They're on air at an NBC affiliate. So when they send out their audition tape, or whatever you call it in TV, I don't know what they call it, sizzle reel, or
it used to be a sizzle reel.
Yeah, sizzle reel, whatever. When not even though you just send it, you just put a link. You put it up on YouTube somewhere, and you send a link to all the news directors all over the country. Hey, here's me. Hire me. That kind of stuff. That's how this business works, and it's the same thing in radio. I mean, if you show up at a TV station or a radio station, let's say you show up at iHeart, and you've worked at, and I'm not making fun of it, by my old alma mater, WSIE. The boss is going to look at you, going like, "Do you have any commercial experience?" Well, no, I worked at the campus radio station for 5 years. Yeah, but if you don't have any commercial experience? You never worked in commercial broadcasting? No, but I was the program director for our campus, campus new wave station. Okay, fine. We'll get back to you. That's what's going to happen.
Exactly.
Okay. So I find it and go back to the fact that I think it's interesting. You said that was she the managing editor? Who was?
She's the executive editor. Yes, so she runs the show.
She was responsive to that. But the problem with that is that if people read the original piece, they would say, "Oh, these two congressmen, they don't." Let's say you've lived in Como, these two congressmen, they never show up here. I read the story in the paper.
And Brad, great point. And I should have pointed out too, in fairness, that Ms. Stevens said in her tweet that a correction will be printed today, so Tuesday in the print edition. Boone County Republicans on Twitter had pointed out as soon as Elizabeth responded, they said, "Hey, that's great that you fixed the online version," but also to your point, Brad, they said, "What about the print edition? Like, fixing it in the digital version isn't the same as fixing it in the print edition."
But
so Ms. Stevens has it fixed, as I understand it, in today's print edition. That offending statement will not be included there. And it's a really good example, too, of there are several times where I have pointed out either factual errors, style errors, glaring errors from the Missourian, and Elizabeth Stevens has fixed them. A previous editor once mocked my suggestions, and a reporter at the Capitol got something wrong, and I pointed it out on Twitter, and a previous managing editor went on a rant of, "Our reporter worked really late last night to do this story, and she got one thing wrong, and you're focusing on that." And it's like, whoa, hey, how about we accept a little bit of constructive feedback, So credit to Elizabeth Stevens, and it goes to show even a guy like David Weber, who's a veteran, folks make mistakes sometimes. So it can be corrected. We all make mistakes. Let's have a little bit of grace. Elizabeth Stevens fixed it, to her credit.
But I think there's another aspect of your story that's interesting, is that the congressman invited the newspaper to his events, and they didn't show, and yet they're saying that he didn't do any of these events, which is
it was a great point, and Mark Alford confirmed. He said, "Hey, I've confirmed with my communications director that we've invited you to these events, and nobody showed up." He had a big fentanyl event, and I believe it was right in Columbia. I think it was in December, and the Missourian didn't send anybody.
Interesting. Okay, another topic to talk about this morning. I heard about this yesterday, and I researched this, and it's sort of interesting. Hyundai and Kia have gotten in trouble for all the stolen cars. And basically what's happened is it started with a TikTok video showing you how easy it is to steal a certain model and year range of Hyundais and Kias because they don't have what's called the PATS key or the immobilizers. In other words, in most modern cars, if you have a key or even a fob, there's a little chip in there which talks to a little box in your car, and if they don't talk, the car won't start. In other words, it's like electronically locking the car. You may be able to put the key in the ignition if it does have a regular keyed ignition and turn that key, and it'll turn the car on, but the car will not start, okay? Well, that's not the case in the Kias and the Hyundais. So, interestingly enough, I believe it's coming the beginning of next month, February 1st, I think something like that. I have to look at this. Hyundai is having an event at Chesterfield Mall where they're going to set up a big old tent, and if you have a Hyundai, you can bring your car out, and they're going to retrofit your car with the new electronic key system for free.
No way.
Yes.
Boy, is that a great PR move or what? Now, will Tashara Jones be there so she can blame Kia and Hyundai for the car theft?
Well, at this point in time, it's only Hyundai, and I think Kia may be doing the same thing. But I believe this was, and you might want to touch on this, and because you're really good at finding these facts, I believe this was spearheaded by one of the St. Louis County council people.
Wow, really?
I believe he was behind this. And supposedly it's going to be, and what's interesting is not only they're going to fix your car. Now, the only problem is there are certain models apparently they can't do, but for the most part, I think the range was from 2011 to 2021. So in other words, like a 10-year range.
Yeah.
That if you have a Hyundai that does not have the electronic immobilizer or PATS key, PATS stands for Passive Anti-Theft System. That's what Ford calls it. I think that's what General Motors calls it as well too. Other ones call it an immobilizer. If you don't have that gizmo in your car, they can just essentially, like in the good old days, break the lock. What they do is because they just.
And didn't you say there's which one do you use a USB?
That's the one. But see, when I first
okay.
when I first heard this, I thought to myself, is this some kind of electronic hack they're using? Essentially, the reason you're using the USB cord is because the little square, and this is the USB, the original USB, the one that goes like in the back of your computer, that square one, it fits perfectly. Once you break the lock assembly out, the USB connector goes physically over this little tab in the steering column, and you're able to turn it. That's what you use for leverage. The turn it. It's physically. It's not, the USB cord is not electronically doing anything. It's physically fits over this little tab where you can grab the USB connector and turn the tab, and the car starts up and away you go.
You can tell that Brad got 100% on his Kia Boys entrance test.
Well, but
when you were initiated into the Kia Boys gang, you passed with flying colors.
But
and then they learned that you grew up around like Bell Fountain and Trampy, and they're like, let him in. Let him lead us
well, and then there's some amazing statistic that, like, I think in St. Louis City and St. Louis County, over the past, I think it's 18 months, like year and a half, I think the statistic was 70% of the stolen cars were either Hyundais or Kias. I'm going like, holy cow.
Hey, where there's opportunity. Where there's opportunity,
I guess
Brad.
So see if you can find which, because you're the guy.
I just looked it up, and I didn't see any. I looked up St. Louis County Council and St. Louis County Councilman, and I didn't see anything, but we can keep looking over the break.
Okay. We are going to take a break. Make sure I get everything set up right here. Yes, right. Do this right here. Do this. And we will be back